on, Mead. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Explorers Club. Is the mic on? It is on. Okay. We good? Hello. I always start all of my talks with, hello, explorers. How are we today? Usually I'm talking to like second graders who are here for a tour of the club. But welcome, welcome. My name is Lacey. I'm the club's archivist and curator of research collections, and I am absolutely thrilled to be here tonight with all of you. You are in for the most spectacular treat ever, and I am not biased at all because it's not, another curator here to talk or anything. But is it anybody's first time here at the club? Oh my goodness, hello, fantastic. So if you did not go on what I'm sure was our fabulous docent Tom's fantastic tour of the club, then to give you the 10-cent version, we were founded in 1904, and we were founded very appropriately for this evening's lecture by 7 members of what was the Arctic Club of America. And our 7 founders essentially got together and said, well, wait a second, there's a lot more to explore than just the Arctic. And their ideas became the foundation of our mission, which today is to explore land, sea, air, and space. And our members were the first to the North and South Pole, highest and lowest points on Earth, and surface the moon. Today we have about, I know, right? They're busy. And I should say, I'm not an explorer, I just take care of their stuff. But today we have about 4,000 active members. We represent over 60 countries. And our members go on upwards of 600 expeditions every year. To point out one very cool, very appropriate artifact in this space for this evening, the sledge hanging above the doorway there actually belonged to Matthew Henson and Robert Peary and was used on their 1909 North Pole Discovery Expedition. And it's just a feat of amazing engineering, and Matthew Henson kind of saying, well, wait a second, we've tried this a couple of times now, we've failed a couple of times now. Our equipment, our gear doesn't look like that of what the Inuit people are using, and they live here, they've probably figured it out, right? So he lived with them, learned their ways, and together they redesigned all of their equipment and all of their gear, and that's one of the products of that. But speaking of the Arctic, that brings me to our amazing guest this evening. I first met Elizabeth after a series of my dog ate my homework excuses, which pushed our appointment several times, all on my end. The first one being a display case catastrophe, the second being a broken car window. But finally, we had the opportunity to meet, and she had reached out in the initial planning stages of what would become her incredible Awe of the Arctic exhibit. It's been a privilege to work with her in a very small way over the last 3 years and see this exhibition come to fruition in such an impactful and beautiful way. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Elizabeth Cronin, the Robert B. Menschel Curator of Photography at the New York Public Library. As I mentioned, she recently curated the Awe of the Arctic, a visual history, and both edited and contributed to its accompanying catalog. She won't tell you this, but all of which received rave reviews. Cronin's scholarly background also includes interwar Austrian photography, and she is the author of Heimat Photography in Austria. Elizabeth has an MA in German Studies from the Technical University in Dresden, an MA in Art History from the University of Minnesota, and she received her PhD in Art History from the CUNY Graduate Center. Please join me in welcoming Elizabeth Cronin.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here at the Explorers Club. It's fun being here and giving a talk. I'm really honored. It has been a pleasure working with the club, and you'll see some of the things that we did together for this exhibition. The talk tonight is going to be sort of an inside look at some of the things that I was thinking about for the exhibition that I did, and really just how I came to the topic, what I did, I hope you'll enjoy it. We'll have time for questions at the end. So I started, the title, of course, of the talk is The Arctic and Its Visual Representation. So I thought a great sort of title slide image for this would be the work of Ellie Ga, who actually worked at the Explorers Club for a while, a long time ago. And that's how she ended up on a ship that was floating around in the Arctic. And she did a whole series of photographs, sketches, artworks, much to the consternation of the scientists on board who were wondering why exactly she was there and what she was exactly doing. But a lot of her work is quite conceptual, and I thought this was kind of a good segue into the question. One of the big questions I had in doing the exhibition was, what do most people who haven't been to the Arctic think about when they think of the Arctic, and what image immediately pops into their head? And so this is a relatively blank image, mostly just snow and darkness. So I thought that was kind of a good way to enter into the Arctic and its visual history. And then many people asked, when I came up with this exhibition idea and was interested in the Arctic, how, why, what? And I point to this, which is a really great image because it shows we don't have card catalogs at the library anymore, but what we do have are these huge black books that have Xerox copies of all the old cards, and they did this in case something went wrong with the computer system. So this is from the Black Book, and if any of you come to the library, you can check out, I mean, the books are there, you can take them off the shelf, you can look at them, they are kind of fascinating. The print is tiny. This is magnified maybe, I don't know, 50 times. I'm exaggerating slightly, but so there was a book in the photography collection called Arctic Exploration, being a collection of photographs of Arctic regions and explorers. And I sort of came across this scrapbook with the photography conservator at the library, and we noticed that it was actually quite a remarkable object. And then we went to the catalog card to see what it was. And as you can see, my favorite part of the card is where the photographer is scratched out and it's written wrong. And then underneath it, I don't know, I have to go back and look, but I just noticed when I put up the slide for this talk that it says Arctic Fringe, and I'm kind of wondering about what, sounds like a good band name, but we will see. So the album is really interesting. As you can see, here are some sample pages from it. And it was a scrapbook it was put together by the library. And the library decided back in the 20s they were just going to write Arctic exploration on it. And there's no sort of indication of where these photographs are coming from. Yes, they are photographs. They're heavily overpainted and retouched. So basically, I did a project on this with the photo conservator at the time, and we gave a paper at a conference, then expanded it for an article. And we thought these really pink skies were super interesting and very cool. But then there were a lot of other interesting motifs in it. And when we expanded it for the article publication, I started looking at reading about the Arctic, reading about photography in the Arctic, thinking about images of the Arctic, and I came across some books. Here, I don't know which ones I looked at, but I looked at a lot. And then I started thinking about these images, and the ones in these books are quite beautiful, quite fascinating. And since I work in a library and it's a public institution, and I think about all the different kinds of people that we come reading books, looking at them, I thought, okay, well, what are we seeing in these books, and how does that inform the reader's opinion of the Arctic? And how are these images, these very, especially Kane's image, it's like very romantic and very beautiful. And there's maybe a sense of danger, but it's really just very beautiful. And then the Naris photograph is also very interesting. The ship is super tiny. And so I kept thinking about, okay, well, what are these illustrations, and how did that inform what people were thinking, because at the same time I was also reading a lot about the Arctic imaginary in literature, in history, and all these other disciplines in critical literature, and they're saying, oh, this is a really big thing, but there was no similar text in art history. And I thought, okay, well, what's going on in art history? And then I think about, okay, Caspar David Friedrich and Das Eismeer, which is a great painting, very well known to art historians. And you can see that, just in case it's the first time seeing this image, there is a ship there to the right. Oh, wait, I have a pointer. And it's barely visible. This is 1823 to 24, so right when sort of the 19th century explorations are just sort of starting to get underway again. For reference, John Franklin goes on his voyage to Spitsbergen in 1818. So it's like right after these first forays into the Arctic. So, okay, I think there's some famous paintings. There's this other Frederick Edwin Church painting, the icebergs, which also has a really interesting, I mean, all of these paintings have super interesting stories behind them. And it's this big, majestic, sublime image. Also with, this was added later, interesting story with the broken mast here to suggest a shipwreck. And then of course, this is the other most famous, this is the other most famous, I would say, Arctic-related painting. This is Sir Edwin, I forgot the Sir, sorry. Sir Edwin Landseer's God Disposes, Man Proposes from 1864. Also shipwreck. It was really actually fun putting this PowerPoint together because I thought, oh, maybe I should write a paper about all three of these paintings. And, you know, this is more the terror, and a lot of this has to do with the human folly of going into this very dangerous landscape. And so what I realized, the point of showing all these three, is that there's these very isolated studies within art history, visual studies of certain iconic images and the Arctic, and then that's it. But no one was really looking at illustrations in the books. So I decided, well, I'm going to keep looking, and maybe it would be a good idea to do an exhibition at the library because we have all the books. So this would be a great exhibition. You know, the library always likes exhibitions where we feature the collection. So, and then, you know, in the course of my research, sort of learning more and more, I come across this image, and this is really hands down one of my most favorites. Because obviously, right? I don't even think I need to explain it, because the icebergs are anthropomorphized into these menacing figures, and it really, to me, brings home the Arctic imaginary, this idea that of these illustrations that go along with the text that you read. And when you start reading some of these firsthand accounts of the explorers, they often talk about sailing through the icebergs, how terrifying it is, the noises they hear from the icebergs, that they could fall over at any moment, you know, should they dare sail further. And this is exactly, you know, the tiny ship here, and they're really not very happy about it. So and the title also is really great, you know, the fantastic appearance of the pack. And I think it really gets at this life-changing experience to see such a, you know, for the explorers who went there, to see such a foreign environment that was really different from anything that they had previously experienced. So I kept researching. COVID happens, lots of things happen. And then many years later, the exhibition opened. So it opened last spring at the library and closed in the summer. I was very proud of the banner and the poster. So, and it got a lot of visitors. So I was also very happy about that. It was spread across 4 rooms of the library. This is the first room. It was kind of historical introduction, narratives, mostly chronicles from different expeditions, some maps to orient people. I realized very quickly a lot of people don't really, I mean, they know where the Arctic is sort of, but they don't really understand its geography, which is interesting. Also, this narwhal tusk belongs to the Explorers Club, and it was it was a great loan, and it fit perfectly on the wall, and it made me very happy. And this is another room in the exhibition. This, of course, was taken before ours. People also went in this room. And then sorry, I went too fast. How do I go back? This one? Yes. This was a really cool idea that we had for this back wall. It was backlit, and it reproduces a lantern slide that is in the Explorers Club that Robert Peary took. And it's a hand-colored photograph to make it look even more amazing, realistic. And that sort of also goes along with this imaginary. One of the things that got me interested is that a lot of the, with the first album I showed you, they're overpainting and retouching so that it can be reproduced to be put in a book so that you can see the landscape. And then I thought, well, what does that mean? It's not, it's always an interesting question in photography because the photograph is reality, but yet it's an altered reality. And here as well, the colors, the pink sky, this is all added in, although it looks really, really good. It's a good one. And then what I thought would be really interesting to do, because I had several years, the exhibition just kind of grew and grew. And then I was slowly taking over the building. Maybe it was fun. So I thought, okay, well, in our era, the Arctic is often in the news, and we have this, I'm reading in history about the Arctic Imaginary and what was it, and people are being informed by the books if they have access to books, And what then do we think about the Arctic today? Well, I didn't really want to show everyone social media accounts, but I thought, well, it would be interesting to look at the artists, photographers, printmakers. I didn't include any paintings because we don't collect paintings at the library. What they experience in the Arctic, what they want to show us, what they want to teach us about what the Arctic is. And then have that be sort of a counterbalance to what is in the historical section on the first floors. So I exhibited work from 40 different artists, some native to the region, some who just traveled there, some make it their life's project to always go back and photograph. And as you can see, it got also a lot of attention. The photographs of the Northern Lights, of course, were always a favorite. But what I thought I would do now is sort of go and look at a few key things that were included in the exhibit, and then also talk about some things that weren't, things that I noticed. This is a really interesting text that I thought would be worth highlighting tonight because it was known as the first, or is known as the first expedition bestseller. And it was made in 1598 by Gerrit de Veer, who was on William Barent's expedition, and they got stuck on Nova Zembla. Like many explorers later did, they would get stuck, and they would have to overwinter. But this was the first exhibit that really overwintered, survived, and then made it back. And Gerrit de Veer, unfortunately, Barent died. He did not survive. Published his diary, and what made the book so interesting, I think, and again, now another research project I have looking into, is not only was the tale exciting, the adventure was exciting, but it also included many, many illustrations. So it really brought this tale to life. And as you can see, there's the, fierce polar bear attacking the man. They're shooting the guns. And then they also meet people, not on Nova Zembla, but on their journey. And so here's this depiction of northerners, either from what was the, northern Scandinavia, what's now northern Scandinavia and northern Russia. They're featured in the book, but they are characterizations, and actually there's a exhibition catalog, and my colleague in the print division wrote a wonderful essay about how these characterizations, especially of native peoples, were just recycled and recycled and recycled. So they were sort of stylized after descriptions of the Inuit, and of course this is nowhere where the Inuit live, but that didn't matter to anyone who was reading it because it looked very foreign and interesting. So if someone's interested in this, I really encourage you to read her essay. It's really fascinating. And of course you see the reindeers and the sleighs behind there. And then this illustration also is interesting because it's said to be the first indigenous representation of or the first indigenous drawing, because it was done by John Sackhouse, who was from Greenland, made his way over to England and Scotland, and then he received drawing lessons in exchange for his portrait being painted, and then he was hired to go back on, to go on Ross's expedition, and then created this drawing, which then was translated into this print. I have not seen the original drawing, but I know it exists. It's in a private collection. But what I find interesting is that it's the first it's labeled as the first indigenous drawing, but of course it's all done after a very Western tradition. But that doesn't mean it's not fun to look at. And you see here, this is Ross, and this is actually John Sackhouse, who's in different clothing. And they're trading beads, narwhal tusk, mirrors, shirts, clothing, any knives here with the local populations. And also, just in case you're wondering, this is what's called a ghost image. It's because and you can see the creases in the paper, it's because the paper folds, it's like a gatefold in the book, and because it's there for a long time, chemical changes happen, and you see the ghost image, which wasn't originally there, but it kind of adds some nice mystery to it, don't you think? And so those are two things that were featured. One of the other interesting things that I came across, which I'll talk quite a bit about, is the repetition of imagery in this sort of artistic imaginary. There are certain stereotypes circulated, certain kinds of images, certain tropes. It's like you always wanted to see the ships covered up for winter. And the first illustration of that, which I found, is in William Perry's book, and this is the Hecla and the Gripper, where they've settled in for winter. And then that was actually so popular that it was reproduced on this plate. And I have to thank Stephen Loring for drawing my attention to the scenery. And then it was reproduced in all manner of newspapers, magazines, and always like slightly different, but it's the same idea. And some of these show actually the Hecla and the Gripper. And as you can see here, here are the Northern Lights. This is almost the exact same image, but without the lights and with more mountains. So everyone's taking a little bit of artistic license. This is the Hecla and the Fury, a different expedition. And then this is also a different one. This is a Hungarian newspaper. So these images circulated far and wide and weren't just in books. Were also in newspapers and magazines. And then just to give you more examples of these typical illustrations that I came across, great ones were, of course, man versus animal, and we're going to hunt them and kill them. So we have the polar bear hunt, which you see two examples, again, almost of the same image. These without the captions, these are all from the picture collection of the New York Public Library, and we do have the source material, but I did not go and look it up for each image, so I apologize for that. But I do know where they are from originally. But you can see here, this illustration is almost exactly the same. This is from, I believe, from Kane's book, and this is from Hayes. And they've changed the landscape slightly, but basically it's all the same. And then here, another example of that, Léonie Donné's book, Walrus Hunt, another Hayes image of a walrus hunt. So it was the people basically wanted to see the same kinds of images, which I find interesting. And a little highlight of Léonie Donné, who I find inspirational. And she went to the Arctic in the early 1840s, and she wrote about her experience. She went with her fiancé at the time, and he was a painter, and he was the official painter of the French scientific expedition. And so she didn't write her book until much later. This 1867 version that you see her portrait in is the third edition of the book. The first one didn't have any images. And you see she's actually right here in her long coat and with the small waist. And then you also see her fiancé, presumably, who was Francois Billard. He's painting here along with some others. So they're painting the landscape. And then these images that were part of the official French multi-volume publication, which is a really great work, form the basis for then her illustrations in her book. So you can see how she's taken this. Don't you love my crooked snapshots? It's to get the glare, you know, and the shadow. This is the library lighting for you. Here you see the landscape, the panorama of the Bell Sound with the crosses, and then she's basically copied that but added some fun iceberg shapes here. And then another instance of that is with the Northern Lights. There's a whole volume that, if anyone ever has time to look at this multi-volume set, it's huge, all lithographs. It's really a wonderful work. And you see the same Northern Lights here. Again, some added fun icebergs in the foreground for good effect, obviously. And then, because I am a photography curator, I thought I should include some photographs. William Bradford was an American painter, probably a seascape painter who went to the Arctic many times, organized the first artistic expedition to the Arctic, and he hired 2 professional photographers to come with him, and then he published this massive book, also huge. There's one at the Explorers Club. And in that book, in addition to mounted photographs, and of course at this time you had to paste the photographs into the book. They weren't just reproduced. You had to cut them all. So actually, interesting fact, I don't have a slide for this, but we have 3 copies of the Arctic regions at the library. And I one day took them all out, put them on the big table, and compared all 3 copies page by page. And because each book was made by hand individually, sometimes the photographs are cut a little bit more on this side or a little slightly different. They ran out. And a lot of times books of this expense and size were basically, they would say, okay, the edition is 300, but then if they only got 200 orders for the book, they would only ever make 200. So it's always an interesting question how many copies actually still exist or were ever made. And it seems that in some cases, some of the smaller photographs they would swap out, and it would be a slightly different photograph. So it's quite interesting. But Bradford was a painter, so I have next to the panorama image that's featured in the Arctic regions also the view of the glacier that he painted. And these photographs really informed his painting, and he became a very skilled speaker, went on lecture tours, showed lantern slides of the photographs, hand-colored, of course, for dramatic effect. And then his paintings started selling really well. He became very well known because people saw the photographs, and then they thought, oh, well, this is really how it looks. So here, the paintings are also more realistic. This is he's legit, you know. And this is a wonderful illustration of that kind of relationship between painting and photography at the time. Another thing that we wanted to feature along with the plate were these sort of more ephemeral objects. So we had a bunch of these cards, which are really very small. These are cigarette cards. They were put in cigarette packages to keep the cigarettes from breaking. And we have a huge collection of these also at the library, thousands and thousands. But this was part of a series called The World's Greatest Explorers, and the drawings, paintings for these were done by Albert Uperti, who also has a work here in the Explorers Club. And in the Explorers Club library, there is this scrapbook that Uperti made, and you can also see where he's collected photographs of the explorers. Some of them he knew, so he got their photographs directly from them. Some of them he didn't, and then he labeled all of them and then used them as the basis for his paintings. So you can see the really nice one here of Matthew Henson above and below, and then also the photograph of Greeley is right above him, although much younger in the photograph than he is in the card. Oh, you want me to go back? No? I thought a good way to move from explorers to the present is with a present-day explorer. This is work by Sebastian Copeland, who is also an Explorers Club member. And for the contemporary portion of the exhibition, in all fairness, I skipped most of the 20th century. You have to stop at some point, otherwise it just goes on, and I didn't have any more room in the library. But I thought it was important to get to the present day, really to think about what people think of as the Arctic. It's a really important region. It's increasingly becoming more and more important as the climate is changing. And so when I started off the title ball of the exhibition with a photograph by Sebastian Copeland, because I wanted to it's beautiful. It's an amazing photograph. And I liked the fact that he is himself an explorer who has skied across Antarctica, has had many expeditions, and he's sort of continuing the tradition of these explorers who were also making sketches, who were also taking photographs, and bringing back their own impressions of the Arctic. And people like beautiful icebergs. I mean, we have to face it. It's true. So I like them as well, as you can see. But then the other reason I liked it is because it apart from the explorer side, the forms, the shapes, these are illustrations from the 19th century, and they also speak to the fantastical nature of icebergs. And you could think, oh, this is a little bit of an exaggeration if you're just looking back into history, but then you see photographs like the one of the ice floe here, and you realize that there's this complicated relationship between what, for a person who hasn't been to the Arctic, what you think is the Arctic, what you don't think is the Arctic, what you see in history, what you should believe, what you shouldn't believe, and it's really complicated and fascinating, I think. And then to pair with Copeland's image of the iceberg, I thought I would put the people who live in the Arctic front and center as well, because they weren't so much part of the dialogue in the 19th century, or at least not in the best light. So Cyril Jasbeck was a photographer I talked to really early on in my research, and he works for National Geographic, spent quite a bit of time living with this community and photographed them. And I really liked this image, number 74, on your left, because it's a heroic image. I mean, there's a tendency in the art history to sort of, if the angle is from the bottom looking up, then it's sort of heroicizes the person, and they're also, the woman on the sled is looking confidently out. There's just this wonderful perspective in the photograph, and it's very proud. So I really wanted to pair that with the iceberg. This is another photograph, the girl with the soccer ball, that we also acquired for the library's collection, which I have too many favorites, but but it shows the modernism. It's not just this sort of romanticized view. And I spoke early on to a Greenlandic artist named Julie Adel Hardenberg, and I showed her film, which is about 10 minutes. And she deals a lot with her own identity as a Greenlander, what it meant to grow up in, a Danish colony, basically, and how she felt, how she looked. And it's a really interesting video. It starts out with views of iceberg, so it's sort of teasing you with like, oh, this is what you think, and then it moves into showing you parts of Nook, shopping center, homes, graveyard, and it sort of goes full circle. She does these panoramic shots, and one of my proudest moments, I have to say, was when we were installing the exhibition, and it was in these open hallways. So the video was playing, we were hanging works, and there was a sign saying installing art, please come back. And this woman walks by the video, and it's not this view, it's a view of a shopping center, and she sees the sign, and then she looks at the video, and she's like, that's the Arctic? And then I said, yes. And it was this great moment where I thought, I've changed her perception. I mean, hopefully she came back and learned a little bit more, but it really was my hope that people would walk through and they would discover something new, see something different that they hadn't thought about before. Another great, interesting work, we exhibited the case and retained steel island, is by the Austrian photographer Gregor Zeiler, and he's traveled all around the Arctic photographing what's called the Polar Silk Road, which is basically the site, it was a term that the Chinese first came up with. It's sites of industry around in the polar regions. So from this massive caisson for drilling oil to the North Warning System, these geodesic domes here, and all the things that exist in places that many of us think are totally empty. And it's really interesting to look at this project and think about it's already built up in ways that we think we're still voting for, like, oh, don't drill here, but actually this has existed for a long time. And by the way, this steel island isn't in use. There's structural problems with it, and one of the problems with building in the Arctic is that everything's sitting on permafrost, and permafrost is melting. So this is a big issue. So highly recommend learning more about this work. And then this is one of the most, it turned out to be one of the most popular images in the exhibition, and hopefully you like it as well. It's by a Dutch photographer who went to Igloolik and worked with the community there. She does a lot of installations, sort of site-specific. She works with communities and then decides what she's going to do and then makes a photograph of it. So she was struck by the generational divide in the community between the elderly and the youth, and the elderly she met knew how to build an igloo. And one of the reasons I think this image was popular is because you see it, you know what it is, it's an igloo, but why is it orange? And what it's going against, which I hoped a lot of the contemporary works would do, your perception, and then you're forced to think about the Arctic in a different way. So she noticed that the elderly were the ones who still knew how to build an igloo. The youth didn't really care so much. obviously these are generalizations, but they did care about Western products, drinking lemonade, soda, and so she decided, well, we're going to make frozen blocks of lemonade and build an igloo. And at first they said, no, we're not. But she slowly convinced them of the project, and this is the man who built the igloo, leaning against it. What you don't see in the photograph is that it was built right next to a school. And so actually the school children played in it all winter, and then it just melted away in the summer. So it became this important part of the community temporarily. And in keeping with some of the other works, I liked this because it also dealt with sort of a relationship to the past. This is, as they all do in many ways, but Marcelo Mosqueta is a Brazilian artist who went up to the Arctic and did a performance piece in a way where he took a long red piece of tape and put it in all the 4 cardinal directions and was trying to sort of map the space in a way that, of course, it's kind of ridiculous, right? But he was struck by the feeling of endlessness, the lack of sense of direction, that a compass doesn't work, GPS often doesn't work. So he was trying to impose this system of order onto the landscape, which is what humanity is always trying to do. What you can't really see very well in this photograph is that I should have taken an installation of you. Each one of these photographs is framed, which is part of the work, in styrofoam frames. So he's also making a comment on the climate of the Arctic. It's like each photograph is in its own cooler, or maybe that they float eventually, I don't know. But it's quite a striking work that I was curious about whether the public would understand it as I do and appreciate it, because sometimes with more conceptual works you don't really know, but I think it got some interest, so I'm happy about that. And finally, Evgenia Abrugeva, she is from Tiksi in Siberia, native, grew up there, and she has a whole series of works that are really quite beautiful, and they get at this sort of mystery, beauty of the Arctic that so many artists talk about, and what draws them to go back over and over again. She has it's a tripartite series, and this wonderful photograph of the whale that's just recently been killed. She went on the whale hunt, and she witnessed how the community was so thankful for getting a whale. And it's very dark, of course, but there is a sort of magical presence to it. It almost looks, I don't know, magical. I don't know how to describe it. And the next photograph, of course, you have the green and the snow, and there's also this idea of this is something else, even though it's an abandoned building from the Soviet era. And I'm almost to the end, so it's almost time for questions. I wanted to end with Tiina Itkonen's work, a Finnish photographer who really goes every year to photograph in northern Greenland with the Inuktitut. And this is one of her photographs from the Hunter series. And you at first don't know what's going on. And he's, of course, putting on his clothing so you don't see his face. But to me, it really spoke to the existence of the hunter, their lack of being able to subsist on the landscape as it melts and as it becomes more dangerous. So he's there, but he's not there. There's a presence and an absence. And then next to it is a photograph that she made on a hunt, and you see the bears and the polar bear barking, or not the bear barking, but the dogs barking. And I was immediately also struck by this photograph because if you remember several slides before, I had these images of the bear hunt, and you would think, oh, maybe they're exaggerated, but then I saw this and I thought this is exactly like the one in Kane's book. So I think maybe I've made you all think a little bit, I hope so, that the imagery coming out of the Arctic is, it's real, it's fantastical, it's everything, all of the above. There's a lot of different aspects, and each image teaches us a little bit more about this place. So I want to thank everyone and end with a photograph of the future. This is my daughter and Percy at the Explorers Club, just to say thank you. And she made me do this. So, no. I think there's a microphone if you have questions. So, yeah.
Hi. First off, thank you so much. That was so fun to listen to and also to see the exhibit at the New York Public Library. So I'm super curious about this, and I'm excited to talk to you more about it because I actually work in Arctic art history as well. But one thing I found fascinating about your exhibit was that you focus entirely on the outsider's perspective of the Arctic and nothing to do with indigenous art created by the people of the Arctic. And so knowing that that was probably a conscious choice, was there ever any overlap that you saw or like instances where Inuit or other indigenous culture art was starting to reflect maybe explorers or the art of explorers reflecting Inuit art or indigenous art?
There is some of that. I would say I'm glad that it was a conscious choice because I have gotten questions about, oh, why didn't you include more indigenous? And one, the answer is because we don't have a lot of it in the library's collection. With the contemporary portion, I tried to get a lot of different voices to sort of balance things out a little bit more. But there are some instances where there's a little bit of overlap influence, but I think it's really hard to, I mean, maybe you know more. I think it's really hard to determine. I mean, there's one Greenlandic produced book that I didn't show here that was printed in 1860, and it was done, they brought a printing press over from Denmark, and the community did the wood blocks, and then they were printed. So it was a collaborative process. So I would say that's the most obvious example, but there's some other, I think there's other examples in painting as well, maybe also in sculpture, but I'm not as familiar with those areas. Thank you. Yes?
Just to follow up on that question, does the library have a wish list for acquisitions? Or,
oh, yes.
Because I live in Alaska, and
right.
We can get you lots of prints by contemporary natives, by past natives. I haven't seen much in the way of older photographs, but I've seen a lot of contemporary photographs.
Yeah, contemporary, there are a lot, yeah.
And then, obviously, you're doing imagery. I think we never would have had the first seal treaty, which was the first 4 nations treaty to protect the seals, had there not been a word picture by Kipling, that basically said neither law of God nor man lists above 60, or north of 63, I think it was. But the imagery is not just icons that are in our mind, but it's actually changed things politically a bunch.
Yeah, it's good. Well, everyone knows the starving polar bear on the iceberg, or, ice floe. So, I mean, I don't even need to show that because I feel like it's in everyone's head from the news. Anyone else? In the back.
Do you have further information about the artist's heritage painting that we
Yes.
see in the lounge
Yes.
next door. You showed some, I think they were called cigarette cards.
Yes.
I'd like to know more about Operti.
Operti went on several Arctic expeditions, and he was named by Perry, Robert Perry, the official Arctic artist on his expedition. And he basically did a lot of paintings, sketches. Most of them appeared in magazines, newspapers. They were very much for the popular consumption. And then he did several paintings, some of which are here. Others are in other institutions and collections. I would say he was well known as a popular artist, but wasn't considered a great artist. But his work is, of course, really important. Yes, sir.
Hi. I'm sorry, I missed the exhibit, so I don't know if this was there, but I'm wondering if you had more pictures and so on of the Arctic without snow, not as white as that.
I did actually in the exhibit. Yeah, I guess I didn't show any here. Maybe I was feeling the cold air coming in. Yes. I did, not as many, but there were some.
I'm thinking about, for example, films such as Genesis 2.0, looking at the mammoth ivory hunters in Siberia and so on, especially that part, the former Soviet Union. Yeah,
there were definitely some photographs with grass, some older 19th century illustrations from summer in the Arctic. And you mentioned films, and that was also a conscious decision not to go that route. One, because we don't collect, well, the library does collect films, but that's there's a lot of good sort of fictional films that were made in the Arctic and not documentary. And I thought about, if I open that can of worms, I'll never finish. So that was also part of decisions. Someone else? Yes, sir.
I have a question. I've also missed the show. I'm really sorry.
No, it's okay. There's a book. You can buy it.
Oh, really? Okay. Did you bring any? Now, I'm curious about you, really, and what's next for you. Has that show gained traction? Is it going to tour? Is there any further opportunities that you see that are going to come out of that?
Right now, it's not scheduled to tour, but I hope that some of the works will eventually. There were a bunch of complicating factors where we couldn't schedule a tour right away. I would like to keep working on this region and area. They always talk about the Arctic bug. I think it bit me too. That we hosted a symposium of different scholars who presented on different topics, and so that's going to be, I'm working on editing a volume of those papers. And there's actually an exhibition that's going to be in Toronto in the spring at the library at the university there. And they're doing a special issue of a journal in conjunction with that exhibition, which I will write for. So some of that, and then other projects at the library. I have lots of ideas, but haven't decided yet. But I don't think they want me to do another Arctic show. But I will keep working on it also, yes. Partially because I think it's important, I've told everyone we have all these great materials, we've collected all of this great stuff, and we need to keep collecting it and keep having it be a center for people to come, for Arctic study. So I think it's really important, especially in today's age. And any of you can come anytime. It's a public library. All you need is a library card. It's very easy to get. You can come and request any of the things that I showed in tonight's presentation, and you can look at them on the table right in front of you, not under glass. So that's kind of fun.
Right here.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm really curious of your own journey with this whole exploration, because it sounds like that it has taken a life of its own as you started. And I'm just very curious, like, can you trace back to like that very, very beginning moment when you saw a picture, or how did you very initially got into this and realized that you wanted to do something more about it?
I don't know. I mean, some of that I explained. I think I have like a inner Wanderlust in myself, and I'm always curious about new and different places. So I think that's part of it. But I'm also really concerned for the environment, so I think that was a big inspiration as well. I mean, these are very personal, almost silly reasons. I like the cold, I like winter, so these are, all these sort of small things come together, but really I thought they were interesting visual questions and interesting ways. One of the reasons I got into the history of photography was I liked the fact that it's very involved with social concerns, and it's such a popular medium, and it's nothing against some, some Renaissance painting or something, but it's a more popular medium. It's not as exclusive, and so I liked that about the books, the photographs, the prints. They circulate broadly. People can see them. People have access to them. So that was also a motivating factor. There was one over here. Yes.
Yeah, hi. So I think we all enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
Did you ever think of now saying, okay, I went to the North Pole, or close to, what about Antarctica? Because there's a huge amount of images, obviously, about Antarctica.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to go to Antarctica, but I don't know. I think maybe eventually. I don't know. Right now, I think the Arctic is in some ways more interesting because there are people who live there and who have always lived there, and I think that is a really big, interesting difference. There's different animals, maybe more in there. I don't know. In the Arctic, different varieties. It's just because it's connected in different ways. I don't know. But yes, maybe Antarctica eventually. I don't know. Good idea. Yes.
Hi, Christina Roman. Thank you so much for the presentation. I just had a question sort of following up with the curiosity about the cigarette cards. I was wondering in your research and curation if you noticed a difference thematically or in trends between photographs and sketches that were produced for more public or consumer purposes versus those that were produced for more scientific or historic purposes?
Oh yeah, there is a difference. There are some, maybe I can talk about some of the things I left out, right? There were some books that had, especially at the end of the 19th century when it was easier to reproduce photographs, there were some where they become, in some ways, more boring. There is sort of a shift, which I get into, I think, a little bit in the catalog essay that I wrote. But it's kind of an interesting question, and I could explore it more, is with with photography, there's less of the fantastical that is involved in the image making process. So in some ways, the books illustrated with photographs are a little bit more boring. I did show some of them. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah. Yeah, sorry. One last question, and then maybe we'll cut it off.
Hi, thank you,
You're
Brenda.
welcome.
And I I'm curious, do you know if Frank Hurley, who was kind of on the Antarctica, the Shackleton experience expedition, if his type of photography impacted anybody photographing or any kind of filmmaking
I'm sure. Yeah.
up in the Arctic? Do you
in
feel
the
like he
Arctic?
had,
Did
he have any impact, do you think?
At that time, everyone sort of knew everyone who was going to those places, so I would think yes, but from the photographs I know of him, they're similar in many ways. The subject matter is similar in many ways, so probably, but I don't know for sure.
All right, and with that, thank you so much. One more round of applause for the amazing Elizabeth Cronin. Thank you all for joining us here tonight. Hopefully we'll see you at another lecture. Hopefully you'll come to the library. If anyone has anything else to follow up with, please feel free to reach out and get home safe. Thank you.
I was just in England.
Oh, how
6
nice.
weeks ago. I have a bunch of photos.
Oh.
Can I send them to you?
Sure.
Are you interested?